Welcome back. Well, the rocky relationship between Hamas and Fatah is nothing compared with Hamas's relations with Israel. Open hostility between Israel and the Islamist organization has left the peace process in tatters and thousands dead. Hamas hits Israel with dozens of rockets in a single day. Israeli incursions into Gaza claim dozens of Palestinian lives. Hamas refuses to recognize Israel and renounce violence. Israel, for its part, will not bend to Hamas's demands and return the occupied territories to Palestinian control. Well, still with us is our guest in Beirut, Alistair Crook, and joining us now from Tel Aviv, Shlomo Brom. He's a former director of strategic planning in the Israeli army and a guest scholar at the Center for Conflict Analysis and Prevention. Mr. Brom, welcome to the program. A recent poll suggested that the majority of Israelis would prefer to talk to Hamas. Do you think that that accurately reflects Israeli sentiment?
Yes, I think that it really reflects the Israeli sentiment because most Israelis don't see any harm in trying to achieve stability through a dialogue with Hamas.
You would have heard about this Yemeni agreement that happened very recently. Surely Israel won't be happy if Mahmoud Abbas mends fences with Hamas. At least the Israeli government won't be too happy.
Yeah, at present it completely contradicts the Israeli policy and the Israeli strategy. That is a joint strategy with the USA of encouraging the traditional partner Fatah and Mr. Abbas and isolating and weakening Hamas.
Do you think it will ever change?
Well, I hope it will change because I think that this strategy is full with self-contradictions and cannot achieve its goals.
Alistair Crook in Beirut, Russia is positioning itself more and more as a mediator in the Middle East. Sergei Lavrov just concluded a 3-day visit to the region. Why do you think Russia is trying to carve a niche for itself as a peacemaker or mediator?
Well, I think this goes very much back to what has happened to Russia at the end of the Cold War and under the presidency of Putin. So Putin, in trying to restore Russian pride and Russian diplomacy, if you like, in terms of taking a position that is neither totally Western, nor is it, if you like, removed from the area, and it's trying to find its own position, and also to find its way back to a position of esteem and influence that it enjoyed in earlier times. I think that's important, but I have to say, having worked in the quartet for a period, Russian influence in the quartet was largely overshadowed by the other three members, the European Union, the United States, and the UN, which tended to be in a different track from that of Russia, for the most part.
Yes, you made a comment on a blog posting where you said that with the status quo as it is, the quartet will be seen more and more as a white man's club. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that it's getting more and more divorced from the region, from the community here in the region, and that it is becoming, if you like, just a club for Western interests. And I think it is becoming a white man's club. And it's not surprising that more and more Muslims are saying to people, well, why is it that on this club that pretends to determine the future of the Palestinians and largely the future of this region, there are no Muslims? And I'm sure that eventually this will come. There can't be special rights for the West in determining the future of this region indefinitely.
Shlomo Brom, would you agree? Do you think that the quartet has fundamental flaws in its approach towards the Palestinians and Israelis?
Well, I think that the quartet is influenced very much by the position of the USA. And as long as that is the position, I don't think that any change in the composition of the quartet will change its policy.
Do you think that Russia can be seen, it's a member of the quartet, but also on its own it's trying to be a peace broker? Mr. Brom, do you think that it can be seen as a more honest broker than the United States?
Well, I visited Moscow a month ago, something like that, and I tried to understand what exactly they hope to achieve. And my conclusion is that they don't know. They want to play a role, but they don't know exactly what kind of role. And because of that, I doubt very much whether their contribution will add something real.
Alistair Crook, I see you nodding in agreement.
Well, I think so, because really the determinant factor, particularly now in the run-up to American elections, will be, I'm sure, the advice that Dick Cheney is now giving to the Israeli government. And it will be very important for any Israeli politicians who might have political ambitions for the future to be in line with US policy, particularly in this period. So as we see increasingly the language, particularly on the Republican front, polarizing towards the idea of moderates versus extremists, and Vice President Cheney coming and talking about defending Israel from the long shadows cast by Gaza, by Syria, Lebanon, and Iran, it doesn't sound as if they're encouraging Israeli government to come to any sort of agreement with Hamas at all. On the contrary, it sounds as if they're pressing Abu Mazen to take a firmer line, to reject a unity government, and that therefore we're being pushed back to divisions, Palestinian divisions. And I think Palestinian divisions rings all sorts of alarm bells for many people in the area who wonder what is the ultimate purpose of this, and wonder if this is to do with a strategy of population shift or whatever. So I don't think that we will see much progress in that direction if this is the tenor of talks in the next days.
Yes, Mr. Crook, you mentioned what Cheney's been saying on his visit to the Middle East. Do you think it's souring for anybody involved in the Middle East peace process, and maybe even casual observers, when someone like Dick Cheney can tell Israel that the US won't in any way be pressuring Israel to make any changes to its current policy?
Well, I can imagine that Abu Mazen listened to that and his face must have dropped intensely, because that's really his one hope, that the United States will actually put some pressure on Israel, particularly in terms of alleviating conditions in the West Bank, alleviating checkpoints, making the economic conditions more viable. But I mean, we have a history of this before. In many ceasefires in the past, we've tried to treat one part of the Palestinian territories differently from another part, and it's never worked. You can't have, if you like, peace and warmth and good relations taking place in Ramallah and war in Nablus. And you can't have it good economic conditions in West Bank and assassinations in Gaza. It's never worked in the past, and it will continue to fail as a policy.
Shlomo Brom, that has continued to fail as a policy, assassinations, incursions. Do you think that Israel actually has a policy? Ehud Olmert's government actually has a policy as to how to deal with the Palestinians at the moment?
I think that they have a policy, but I am not sure that this policy is an effective one. Because, as I said, the policy is consisted of two parts: of continuing the siege on the Gaza Strip, and on the other hand, strengthening Abu Mazen by trying to improve living conditions in the West Bank, and by being engaged in a political process, in negotiations that will present the
sorry to interrupt you. Do you feel that Israel is taking heed when reports come out like this one by the International Crisis Group to say that when you have a siege on Gaza, it only strengthens Hamas? Do you think that they actually care?
Well, the question is, when you talk about politics and strategy, the question is not whether they care or don't care. The question is whether they pay attention. And I think that there is a growing understanding in the Israeli government that you cannot have useful negotiations and you cannot really strengthen Mr. Abbas' position when there is escalation in the Gaza Strip. So the solution that they are trying is some kind of a balancing act in which on one side they are not interested in really engaging Hamas because they don't want to recognize Hamas. But on the other hand, they want stability and quiet. So they are trying to create a kind of de facto ceasefire with Hamas using the services of Egypt.
All right, Mr. Brom, thank you very much for your thoughts, as well as Alistair Crook and earlier Hassan Nafa. And thank you so much, the viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Bye-bye for now.